All right. Hello, everyone. So for those of you who don't know me, I am a consultant at NCC Group, specialized in hardware and embedded systems. I'm based in Waterloo in Canada. I created Sniffle, the Bluetooth 5 LE sniffer that I released here a few years ago. And in general, I'm a Bluetooth geek, car enthusiast, and general embedded stuff nerd. So this talk is all about Bluetooth LE-based proximity authentication systems and attacks against them. So the basic idea behind proximity authentication is if you have some object in your possession, you walk up to something that you want to unlock, you can go and touch the door lock and have it unlock or start up or do whatever you want to achieve. So this is normally achieved through wireless communication between the object in possession and the object you want to unlock. And the most common example of this is automotive keyless entry. With a car, quite commonly you just keep a key fob in your pocket, walk up to the car, touch the door handle to unlock it, and the same way you could start the car just keeping the key in your pocket, not needing to have it otherwise interact with it. But the same kind of tech is also used for many other applications. So there are smart locks for home applications that have similar features. They're building access control systems where you don't need to actually tap a fob, you just walk into the building. And there are also some laptops and mobile phones with similar functionality, letting you either unlock them or keep them unlocked when you have some trusted device in your possession. Now, for proximity authentication to work, you need to be able to measure how far away the device in your possession is from the device you're unlocking. And there's several ways to do this. So one of the simplest and most obvious is just measuring the received signal strength indicator. So when you have a strong signal for communication between these two devices, that probably means they're close together, but we'll talk into why that's not. It's obvious why you can smooth that. There's also time of flight-based ranging that's possible, where you measure how long it takes for signals between the devices to propagate roughly with the speed of light. There also are other measurement systems. For example, there's a multi-carrier phase-based ranging. The idea behind that is if you're transmitting, say, multiple tones at different frequencies, the phase shift in the different frequencies would be different when you have the same amount of transport delay. So based on the difference in phase between carriers, you can measure how far things are. There's also a feature in Bluetooth LE, though it's just a basic radio concept used for measuring the angle of arrival of signals. So if you have, say, a multi-antenna system, then you're measuring phase differences between where the same signal reaches multiple antennas, then you can figure out the direction from which the signal. So angle of arrival, while it's not a distance measuring scheme in itself, you can use it together with the other schemes to find out where the person is that's authenticating, or if you have multiple of these, you can do some sort of triangulation with that as well. And the other schemes as well, they could also be used with a triangulation type setup. So for example, inside a car, you want to know which door the driver or the person with the fob is approaching, or if, say, with a smart lock, you want to be able to make sure the person with the trusted devices on the outside when they're unlocking it, so that, say, a key fob or smartphone, whatever, left inside the house can actually unlock the smart lock. So all these distant measurement schemes are vulnerable to different types of attacks. So with the RSSI-based systems, if you're just communicating with a device nearby, you could fool it. Some devices have very insecure authentication schemes where you can just do a replay attack where you record previous authentication signals and play them again. But if you have a properly designed auth scheme, then that shouldn't work. The next step up from that is a relay attack, where you bridge the communications between the two devices so that they think they're close to each other, even if they could be farther apart. So there are several ways you can do this, either boosting the signal, amplifier, or retransmitting it from a close to the device you're communicating with. both these approaches can make devices think they're close to each other, at least from an RSSI perspective. Now, with time-of-flight-based measurements, if it's not integrated as part of what's called a secure ranging scheme, where there's some cryptographic channel response coupled to it, then if there's, say, a time-of-flight ping, you can just respond to that right away from very close to it. Secure ranging schemes are a little more complicated. We'll talk about those a bit later. And for other systems, for example, with phase-based ranging, you could just transmit these the multi-carrier signals with 3 offset phases, so that the receiving device thinks that the phase difference represents some distance when it's actually smaller distance. And even with time-of-flight-based attack schemes that are employed in secure ranging, there are some possible attacks as well. So, for example, there's the early detect late commit attack, which lets you slightly widen the window over which a time-of-flight response to a ping is recognized. With BLE, it's possible to have a mobile device like your phone act as the authentication token. There's all sorts of devices that use BLE for proximity auth. So there are many cars that function like this, including all current Tesla models. With smart locks, there are many brands of home smart locks that you can unlock by just keeping your phone in your pocket and tapping the lock. For example, the Kivo line of locks. With mobile phones, for instance, you can keep an Android device unlocked if some Bluetooth device, LE or Qasim, is maintaining a connection with it. With computers, there's features like the smart lock on Chromebooks, which lets you unlock them if you have an Android phone nearby that's able to communicate with it over Bluetooth with a strong signal. And there are all sorts of other products with similar applications. So there's home alarm systems that can disarm when you keep the phone in your pocket. There are building access control systems. You just walk into the building if your phone is able to communicate with the door control system over BLE. Patient tracking systems for hospitals, and all sorts of things where it would be interesting from a security standpoint to be able to make things think in a different location close to each other. Now, BLE was never designed as a protocol for proximity auth. So there's no functionality in Bluetooth LE or Classic right now to give you a good way to measure time of flight. At least with standard radios, you could customize the radio phone with it and add on to the protocol, but then you won't be compatible with off-the-shelf phones. And likewise, there's no suitable built-in functionality for phase-based ranging either. So with BLE devices, when they do proximity auth, they're just using RSSI-based measurements, or sometimes combining that with angle of arrival. So as a result of this, BLE proximity auth is vulnerable to relay attacks. And the Bluetooth SIG has known this for the longest time, ever since BLE came out, essentially. And they themselves state that you can spoof devices into thinking they're close to each other, and you shouldn't be using BLE proximity auth for protecting valuable assets. Nonetheless, all sorts of makers of products do that anyways because it's convenient. Just about every smartphone nowadays has BLE within it, and it's just an easy protocol to work with and broadly compatible. So, relay attacks are nothing new. They've been done for ages and have been used against all sorts of proximity auth systems in the past. There are a few variations of relay attacks you can do. So one of the simplest is, here I'm just using a phone in this car as an example, but you could have, let's say, a key fob, smart lock, or the other device. With the simplest attack, you just amplify the signals transmitted by each device so that the RSSI at the other side would make the device think it's close by. There's also a variation of the attack where you transport the signals between the two sides possibly to a different carrier or different means, and just retransmit it from up close. So with the latter, it does let you bypass some additional types of defenses. Now, when we go back to the former, just the simple analog signal amplification, it's using really simple hardware. The latency you add is mainly just from the speed of light for communication between the two sides. And the overall patterns and timing of communication does not get changed from normal unrelayed operation. So it's fairly reliable from that standpoint. However, there are limits to how far you relay this, right? So for one, usually you still have a limit to how much you can amplify the signal. And additionally, when you get to relaying over very long distances, the time of flight becomes an issue, and you could start violating timing requirements if they're strict protocol. Additionally, if you have a protocol like Bluetooth, where your bidirectional communications on the same frequency, it becomes a bit more complicated. Because you need to be able to figure out who's transmitting when. And furthermore, if you have multi-receiver systems, then just by looking at the pattern over which RSI declines by distance, by doing triangulation, you can detect that something is fishy if you're just amplifying the signal from far away. So you could do an analog version of the transport and retransmit type relay attack as well, where you capture the frequency of interest, you transport that analog data, but over a different carrier, and then retransmit it up close to the device. So this way you can avoid many of the triangulation-based defenses, and you still get the analog relay benefits of the super low latency and the minimal disruption of the timing and patterns of communication. But when you start doing this, the hardware becomes a bit more complicated, and you're still limited to in the distance you can transport for analog transport in general. Finally, with the transport retransmit type of attack, you can also do another form of it where you're taking the digital packets or frames over the air and sending those rather than full raw analog signals. If you're doing it this way, you're dealing with a lot less data, and you could use transports like the internet fairly easily if you don't have huge bandwidth connection. Also, when you're doing it digitally like this, it's quite easy to add in other functionality like packet injection, modification, or droppings, anything that a class can limit could do as well. But when you're doing it digitally, you do have some drawbacks. So for one, because of all this additional processing involved, there is considerably more latency introduced. And furthermore, the timing of when things get transmitted may not precisely match in all-day operation because of latency in the various processing and transport operations. So with BLE, there have been a bunch of relay attacks that have been done in the past, operating at various levels of the stack. So to understand those, I'll briefly introduce how the Bluetooth stack for LE's data. So like with any radio protocol, the lowest level you have physical layer, that's the analog transmission and receiving. Then above that, the link layer is what denotes who transmits when and how the packets are structured and the channel hopping scheme and things like that. And then both the link layer and the file layer are implemented within a Bluetooth controller chip generally. That is connected to a host over a standardized protocol called the host controller interface. There are a few different variations of the HCI, but they all have the same types of commands that HCI transports. And then on the host side of things, you have several layers of the stack. So there's L2 cap, which does some protocol multiplexing for higher level protocols and reassembly for long PDUs. And then at the app layer in Bluetooth LE, you've got the GATT protocol. So the generic attribute protocol just structures communications into services and characteristics. when you're writing an application, say on mobile OS or most embedded systems like BLE, you'd be interacting with GATT. There's also something called the generic access profile, which just defines the procedures for establishing connections and the roles for how a device will act as an advertiser, and the other will act as a scanner, and then initiate a connection, and then act as master and slave roles in the connection. So, one of the first ways that BLE Relay attacks were done was operating at the GATT layer using standard APIs and normal Bluetooth stack. So, this was done both by Sultan and Damian and Qasim. They both, around the same time, released different implementations of relays and middle tools that operate at the GATT layer. More recently, there's been a relay that just operates directly with the HCI and bypasses much of the Bluetooth stack that was implemented as part of Mirage there. This, by operating at a lower level, you get a bit more control, and additionally, you avoid a bit of latency as well. And then most recently this year, there was an analog relay attack published that was relaying the entire 2.4 gigahertz spectrum while handling bidirectional communication through transmit power detectors. Now, all these relay attacks have different benefits and drawbacks. So, when you're relaying at the GATT layer, working your way up to the stack and not having control over low-level radio operations, you end up introducing a clearly detectable amount of latency in responses to GATT requests. And additionally, because you're using normal Bluetooth controller chips, they do not know how to follow a connection where the encryption key, the long-term key, is unknown. With an HCI relay, you can avoid some of those on the stack, you get a bit more control, but nevertheless, there still is some detectable latency that you introduce, and again, you can't work with an unknown SDK with the HCI. The controller hardware doesn't know how to follow up the key connection. Now, with an analog relay, you can get past these limitations. So the added latency is only from the transport speed of light, and the encryption supports population just sends whatever is being sent over the air, and never mind what the encryption is. But with an analog relay, you have some limits over how much it can modify the signal, so how far it will propagate. 2.4 gigahertz is not particularly good at very long distance communications. Now, it's possible to combine some of the benefits of the HCI relay and the analog relay by operating at a level of a stack in between these. We can operate at the link layer of the stack and just send the PDUs encrypted or not over the air while still just having the benefits of digital relay. So, to understand what a link relay attack is, I'll quickly give you an overview of how BLE communications work. So at the physical layer, it just takes a 2.4 gigahertz band, splits into 40 channels, of which 3 are used for advertisements to indicate the device is available to connect to, and then the other 37 are used for sending data in the connection. The modulation is Gaussian frequency shift keying, so gradual frequency modulation. And there's time division for multiple devices to coexist together, as well as within a single connection for bidirectional communication. And there are a few different PHY modes. The original 1 megabit per second mode, and also newer, faster 2 megabit per second mode, as well as error correcting coded PHY for long distance communication. Within the BLE connection, it starts off with an advertising packet that will be sent by a peripheral device, and then the central device will issue a connect-in request within the interframe separation time of the advertising packet. Assuming the peripheral device receives that connect request, then they will both get ready for a connection. So the connect request will indicate when the first so-called connection event will occur, and during the connection event, the initiator takes the master role in the connection, will send the first frame over the air, and then, assuming the peripheral or slave device in the connection got the connect request, then it will respond to that. And, from there on, then there will be connection events where they're alternating PDUs going between the master to slave and slave to master directions. Within BLE, there is also a retransmit acknowledgement mechanism where within the connection event, both sides will alternate between sending data to each other until both sides say they have no more data to transmit in this event, or timeout occurs, or on some devices, the master can choose to end the connection event prematurely, even when there is more data to transmit from the slave device if it just wants to do something else for the remaining radio time. And once a connection event ends, there will be no more communication until the next event occurs. So there is an interval between connection events called the connection interval, and at every connection event there is a switch to a new frequency for communication. So, knowing how the link layer works, we can build a relay attack here, and what a link layer relay does is it just takes link layer PDUs, encrypted or not, and forwards them off to the other side. This cannot be done with off-the-shelf Bluetooth controller chips using the normal HCI, because the HCI operates at a higher level of protocol. It doesn't give you control over just sending raw link layer PDUs, but it's still a digital relay where the PDUs you're transmitting are a very small thing that you can send over almost any network. And in addition to being able to forward encrypted PDUs, you also get more control over the timing of low-level radio operations, since you can construct your own connect requests, and you can also inject PDUs for requesting changes to connection timing. So this way you could pick the timing of connection events to be most suitable for you to mimic the latency of an unrelated connection. Additionally, because you're bypassing Bluetooth stacks and from the typical controller chip, you can also get a bit less latency through that. So the basic flow for a link layer relay attack is not all that different from traditional twin connection relays. So it starts off with, so the legitimate slave device is the peripheral that is advertising. It will send out advertisements, and normally, once the central device, the legitimate master, sees those advertisements, it will connect to it. But with a relay attack scenario, we have a relaying device that acts like a connection master that receives those advertisements and passes them on to the relaying slave that will mimic the legitimate slave. The relay slave will then broadcast the same advertisements. The legit master will connect to it, and once the relay slave is connected to, notify the relay master. That will connect to the legitimate slave. And once we have two connections established with independent timing, then the link layer PDUs can just be forwarded between the two sides. And if either side has nothing to transmit or is waiting for data, they can just transmit empty PDUs, and the Bluetooth protocol will allow that. For the latency of communications, we can control that or limit it through control of the connection interval of the connection events, and also controlling when these events occur through an offset to the transmit window. So, since we're relaying the link layer, we can fully control these on the master side since we're sending the connect request, and on the slave role, while we don't have direct control over it, we can still inject PDUs to request particular connection and timing parameters. By default, on iOS, you'll have a 30 millisecond connection interval for most connections, and on Android devices, it will be 48 and 3/4 milliseconds. So, within both Android and iOS, these connection intervals are not directly exposed to the users, and any manipulation of the connection intervals is also not visible at the app layer APIs on iOS or Android. So any of the apps that provide the phone as a key functionality will not be able to tell when there's any manipulation of these connection intervals happening at lower levels. So one of the simpler ways you can achieve no added latency in overall operation is switching to a quicker connection interval on one side of the communication. So, for example, we could keep the original communication between let's say the legitimate master is a car and the legit slave is a phone. But the relay master can pick a quick connection interval for communications between the relay master and the phone. And the phone would not know that a quick connection interval is chosen. However, at the app layer, the phone would not know it's happening with the controller chip. And what you could do is that even though there is some latency in the digital transport PDUs from between the two sides of the relay, it can be kept within a few milliseconds. And in normal unrelated operation, it will take at least one connection event to get a response to any requests that involve the relay stack doing some processing. And this is not even guaranteed to be a single connection event. In normal operation, there could be some variability in timing. Sometimes you can take multiple connection events to get a response to, say, a GATT request. But because we can have a quick connection interval on one side, even though there is latency in both the transport between the sides, we can get a response turnaround within the same timing that normal unrelated operation would have. So from the perspective of both sides, the time it takes to get a response is no different from related operation. Now, this is important to note because there have been many devices in the past that try to defend against prior GATT-based relay attacks by measuring the latency of GATT responses. And because the prior relay attacks tended to introduce one or more, usually 2 or 3 connection events of latency, they would reject response to that excessive latency. But just by doing tricks like this, you can get latency down to normal unrelayed levels. Now, even if you were not able to control the connection interval, there are other things you could do as well. For instance, you could stagger when the connection events happen between the two sides, such that even when you account for the transport latency, the time it takes for a response to come back is delayed by only a single connection event. And because there's an inherent variability in the operating system of the host, this additional event of latency is still within the range of normal timing variation. So it'll be accepted by most devices. If they're overly strict, they'll get a lot of false positives in normal operation as well. Now, when you have link layer encryption, that adds another little bit of complexity to such attacks. So within Bluetooth Low Energy, there's AES encryption in common mode with CBC MAC. The encryption is pretty solid, and there's also protection against both replay attacks, the use of things like unique session keys and packet counters, and additionally protection against reordering of packets and injection of additional packets through the use of these counters. And one thing that's important to note is that both data and control PDUs are encrypted. So data PDUs are the data that's being sent back and forth, And control PDUs control operation of the link layer, like which channels should be used for transmission, when should we transmit, how quick are connection intervals. These are all things that can be changed during the BLE connection as part of adaptive frequency modeling. So you need to be able to understand these control PDUs to keep following the connection. So this encryption is pretty solid overall, even though there have been weaknesses in the key establishments. But if we say that the LTK used for the communications is something that's securely exchanged or something unknown to the attacker, then we can't effectively break this encryption in methods. So we have to find a way to work with this encryption. A few things to note that are useful when relaying is that with empty PDUs, they're not encrypted, and they don't influence the packet counters either. So you can inject as many empty PDUs as you want, and it will not cause any errors. It's also useful to note that within the packet header, there is information about the sequence numbers for retransmit. That's not encrypted or authenticated. And additionally, within the packet header, in the portion that's not encrypted, there is a field indicating the high-level type of PDU. So there's data PDUs and control PDUs. This field in the header will let you distinguish between those. So when you're trying to relay a connection that has link layer encryption, the biggest problem is that when you have link layer control PDUs that are changing when connection events occur or which channels are in use or which PHY mode is in use, if you can't decrypt these control PDUs, then you don't know when the device will be transmitting, which channel they're operating on, and which PHY mode is in use. So while with an analog relay you could just ferry the entire 2.4 gigahertz band, this is not feasible with digital relays that are only operating on one channel at a time. So this is why past relays that are using normal HCI-based controller chips have been unable to relay connections that had link layer encryption in use where the key is unknown. Additionally, when you have link layer encryption in place, once encryption is in progress, you cannot inject or drop any PDs. You need to be able to send everything across. And if you set up unequal connection intervals between the two sides of the connection, thanks. So when you have any control PDUs sent that contain what are called instant fields specifying when the new connection parameters are to take place, the instant field of the control PDU is a counter of connection events. So if the number of connection events since connection start is different on the two sides, this will cause the connection to be lost because the side will see the instant time, the instant events number for the new parameter to take effect is out of range. So because of this, if we are dealing with encrypted connection, we cannot do unequal connection intervals if there are ever any connection parameter changes. So there are ways to deal with this. So with the empty PDUs, we can just send those whenever we need to send something and will not mess up encryption. And for dealing with the encrypted connection parameters, what we can do is analyze the traffic even though we can't decrypt it. So we do know when a PDU is a control PDU just based on that one unencrypted header field, but we don't directly know what type of control PDU it is. But we'll talk about how we can deal with that a bit. Additionally, connections always start off unencrypted, and there's always a little window in which you can inject communications before the encryption cycle happens. And this is also interesting because within the design of BLE, there is no mechanism to later verify, once encryption started, that any data before encryption started was tampered. This is just a feature of the spec. So whatever you do before encryption started, early on in the connection, will not trigger any encryption requests. So what we could do is inject PDUs and start the connection so that we can switch both sides of the connection to a quick connection interval. And in that case, the instance will go in sync. We can have lower latency again, really quick connection intervals, and no dropping modification control PDUs would be needed to still get low latency. If we, for whatever reason, had issues doing that, we could also do connection events, stagger the approach where we keep the original connection intervals. And for the connection parameters that include the connection interval, the time offset at which the connection starts, and such, it turns out that all these control PDUs that specify changes to connection parameters, all of them are uniquely identifiable based on the length. So just by seeing that one header field that says this is a control PDU, and then looking at the length of the overall PDU, you can identify what kind of PDU it is. Also, there's been some prior research done by a friend of mine, and we found that almost always new connection parameters take effect 6 or 7 connection events from the time the control PDU is set. Within the spec itself, there's a field called the instance, and this instant, according to the spec, has to be at least 6 connection events from the time the changing PDU was sent. However, there's no upper bound on the spec. Nevertheless, within real device time, they almost always take effect pretty soon after the minimum amount of time is elapsed. When we see a PDU whose length matches phi update PDU, it's almost universally switched to 2 megabit phi mode from 1 megabit phi mode. So if we see that PDU, all we have to do in relay is switch to the 2 megabit phi mode after 6 or 7 connection events. And we don't even need to get the number of connection events exact either, because there is support for retransmits. So if we miss some data, we can just capture the next connection point and that's not. When there is a change to the channel map specifying which channels are used, what we could do is just initially assume all the channels are used, hop through all the channels in normal hop sequence, assuming all the channel maps are used. And if any of the channels we don't see the data on, then we can figure out that channel is not. So again, because we have this retransmit functionality, even if we're on the wrong channel for a little amount of time, we won't lose the connection to that data on the next correct channel. And finally, with the timing of connection events, from the slave role, since it's waiting for a PDU coming in from the master, it can just listen for when the PDU is sent to the master and just pop the next channel right away to it. For the master role of the connection, since it has to figure out the correct time to transmit for the slave to respond, it's a little tricky, but I discovered that with devices you can send empty PDUs within all the possible transmit time windows. So the transmit time windows are at 1 and 1/4 millisecond. So an empty PDU is shorter than that. So you can just send empty PDUs at all the possible time offsets till you find a time offset that gets the response on the other side. So now, using all these techniques, I did implement a relay attack using the same hardware as my Sniffle-based Sniffle. I just extended its link layer functionality to add some functionality, and I implemented mission code software to do this. Unfortunately, today I'm using just showing the possible use of tools. So it can be a package that nonetheless, I'll show you quickly what can be done with this. So here's one demo video unlocking QuickSet Hero smart lock. So what's happening here right now at the start is that I specified the MAC address of the master. In this case, the master was the lock itself, and the slave device would be the phone that's transmitting advertisements. So what it's doing here, I specify the MAC address of the slave phone. This script here first captures the advertisements on the phone, and once it captures advertisements, it mimics them on the other relay device that's close to the smartphone. The phone here was quite far away from the laptop here, but this is communicating. Now, on the other side of the relay here, this device is now advertising, mimicking the phone. So the lock will connect to the slave side of the relay. And here, when I tap the lock, what happened was that it established a connection to the relay slave. Communications reported between the two sides. I was able to stay within the latency requirements of the lock and prove the unlock thinking. And the other demo, which published earlier this year, was against Tesla Model Y. So here, what's happening is that right now we have the car locked. So if I try unlocking it, it does not mean the phone that's authorized to unlock is very far away at another end of the office building. But now I have a relay set up within the office that's near the phone, and the other side of the relay here is hooked up to my laptop. So by relaying the communication between these, I'm able to stay within Tesla's time requirements, which aren't overly strict as possible to make GATT-based relay work within short ranges, most likely, but with this, I have a huge amount of timing margins to even do a relay attack over quite a distance. And in addition to unlocking the car, seemingly I can relay the operation scheme off of that startup. I'll get to that in a moment. Right before I wrap up, I'll quickly tell you a bit about mitigations. The most obvious is require user interaction to unlock, but that defeats the point of passive entry where you don't have to interact with the device. For instance, if you had a key fob and you had to require hitting a button to approve the unlock, then you can't relay that without getting user interaction. There also are schemes for something called secure ranging that combines time of flight measurement with cryptographic challenge response. There are many different standards that can be used to do it. Right now, one of the most popular is the ultra-wideband 82 or 15 standards, like the high rate pulse and low rate pulse versions of it. There are certain attacks that can be possible against schemes that use secure ranging, but nevertheless, these types of more basic relay attacks cannot be used against it. You have to be there's limited ranges that you could extend using these types of pseudo-illusion attacks. It's also possible sometimes to check the GPS location of the phone and compare it to the device you're unlocking, but this isn't always viable because there may be issues with how it takes to determine your location and power consumption concerns as well. And also users may have privacy concerns around communication system that. And finally, if you have a fob or phone that's used to unlock things, if you use it so long to tell them what's in the station for a long time, then you can just disable the functionality of the station. And many things do not boost. So putting it all together, really attacks are quite practical. There are many ways you could do it, but nuclear relay link layer encryption does not stop relay attacks. The latency in relay communications can be made to mimic normal unrelated connections, and the current version of the spec does not give you secure way from that. So it is possible to do secure ranging using a different spec, such as you can pair that with BLE communications. So that's being done by but that is still requiring use of it. All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sultan.